So we're going to talk about how we actually do that, creating a rule of life. And this is where we're going to try to get super practical. So I'll talk about some steps, talk a little bit about my story, and then we're actually going to sit down and write some stuff down on a sheet of paper. If you flip over your paper, you see kind of a chart. We're actually going to write some stuff down today. If you really don't want to use a piece of paper and you want to use like a device, feel free to. But we're going to get there eventually. So some steps into creating a rule of life. The first is review your current habits, and just keep doing those things. So likelihood is if you're in this room or if you're watching online, like your life probably is an incomplete shambles. And if it is, there's room for that and we can work with that. But you probably have some base rhythms and some things you're already doing. And so this isn't like, hey, let's throw out the baby with the bathwater. Let's flip the tables, let's reset everything. No, like what are you already doing? Some of you are in a community group. That is a practice. That is a spiritual discipline. You should keep going to that community group. It's going to make you more like Jesus over the long term. Or some of you already have a prayer rhythm, or already read your scripture at this time, or whatever it is, or are serving here at this church, or are leading elsewhere. Like those are rhythms and practices that you should keep doing. And you should just look at and see like, okay, these are really important to me, and you should keep maintaining. I think a lot of times people see a rule of life or hear someone talk about it, or we talk about what it looked like to do this, in the 500s in ancient Rome, and they're like, wow, I need to change everything I'm doing, and I need to completely rework my life. And the reality is a lot of us are just small tweaks. There'll be some big ones, but mostly small tweaks. And so review your current habits. Look at your last week's schedule. Like that's another thing, is actually review your schedule and be like, where did I spend most of my time? What did I end up doing? If a week is too long, just take one day this week and just write down literally everything you did and just think through, if this week is representative of a whole week, and that week and then a whole year, is this pushing me toward discipleship with Jesus or not? And sometimes we have off days, we have weird days, but just a general day, what it looks like, just walk through, what do I actually do? Highlight the good things and then begin to ask the Spirit of like, hey, what things do need to get removed? So review your current habits. The second, and this has been kind of a theme throughout this whole 5 weeks, is start small. Again, start small. Run a mile before you run a marathon. I tend to have that personality where I'm like, oh man, someone ran 100 miles, I can run 100 miles, let's go run 100 miles. And then Kayla's like, hey, you should run like a marathon first before you run 100 miles. And I'm like, it's probably a good idea. I'm gonna start there. Like I just tend to like get really excited about like what could happen, and I just like, I'm gonna go do that. And then I get like hurt, or I get burned out and I don't actually accomplishing anything. And so I think, again, the temptation here is gonna be like, wow, I'm gonna do 30 new things in my day. And it's like, you only have 24 hours, so you really only have so much time, and a lot of that you're sleeping, and you have to come to work. So like, let's start small, and let's actually just ease this in and move this in. And that's actually my story, is starting really small. My mornings used to be full with watching sports highlights. I would wake up, I would get my coffee, I would like make my breakfast, and I would just watch the previous day's sports highlights for like an hour. And so then I was like, oh man, I seem distracted all the time. Like I have a hard time being present. I'm really lazy. And then I was just like, that's probably why, as I spend the first hour of my day watching sports, the thing that I just want to do all the time and be distracted with, I should probably stop doing that. And so I was just like, I don't know what to do instead. So I'm just going to read. Reading sounds like a good thing to do. And so I just started reading every morning. And then I'd read for like 15, 20, sometimes 30 minutes. And then I was like, well, if I'm reading, I should probably also read my Bible. So I started reading my Bible like before I read another book. And I was like, well, if I'm reading my Bible, I should also probably pray. And so then I just kind of created this prayer, reading my Bible, and reading a book routine. And I was like, I should probably do this like not just in the morning, I should do this some other time during the day too. And what started off with literally just reading a book for 10 minutes ended up becoming something that like blossomed and took shape. And I think of like a snowball rolling down a hill, like gained momentum. And I'm beginning to like make small shifts throughout my schedule, throughout my day. And it just started with one small change. And so start small. I would say even like a number, start with 5, maybe 7 practices. So I have a list of practices, probably I think on the next page. Like I say 5, maybe 7, because we only have so much time. A lot of these can be like kind of work together. But don't feel this tension to be like, I need to practice everything I see on this page at one time in 1 week. Pick 2 to 3 be with disciplines. Pick 1 to 2. I would really say 1, becoming like. It's really hard to go through counseling and Sabbath and get rid of all of your clothes and fast every day. Just a lot to do. So just pick 1 and just go for that this next season. And then doing what Jesus did, like hospitality, evangelism. Like, you can only talk to so many people in one day. Like, just pick 1, do what Jesus did. Like, pray through what your life looks like, what's going on, and just pick 1. And just, what would it look like for me to do this once a week? What would it look like for me to do this, every other week? And just start small. The third, and this is, I think, the most important of all of these, is be specific. Be incredibly specific. I tend to have these lofty goals of running 100 miles, and I'm like, I want to run 10 miles a day. And then I just never think through what it would look like to run 10 miles a day. And I don't write it down, I don't create the time for it, and it doesn't just happen, and so I don't end up doing it. And what I learned kind of the hard way is I would be very vague in how I wanted to do something, and especially a practice. I'd be very vague in walking through a practice of spiritual discipline. I think most in particular Sabbath. I was very vague in how I wanted to Sabbath, and so it was hard to do because I didn't actually think through or picture what it would look like for me to go hour by hour and practice a Sabbath, or how I would start it, or how I would end it. It was very vague, and it's just really hard to accomplish really vague goals. And so be very annoyingly specific, like where you're going to be, what you're going to if you're going to wake up and do prayer in silence and solitude, like what time are you going to wake up? Are you going to have coffee? Are you not going to have coffee? Where are you going to sit? What environment are you going to be? How long are you going to do it for? And the reason why I say that is because the more we can set ourselves up for success and know what we're walking into, just the easier it's going to become in implementing something new. It's really interesting. People who set their workout clothes out in the morning before they go and work out are 3 times more likely to actually go work out that morning than people who don't set out their clothes. And it's just a little habit of I moved 1 more barrier from this becoming something I can't do, and I just created 1 more simple step to doing it. And the same is for when we do things to follow Jesus, is just remove the obstacles that might be there, be very specific, and write it down, again, annoyingly specific. The fourth, consider your season of life. This is a huge one. Right now, in my season of life, it would be really unrealistic to be I want to spend an hour of silence and solitude a day. It's just not going to happen with 2 little kids and just both full-time working parents. And instead, what I would do is set myself up for disappointment by creating that expectation. And it's not my ability to fulfill the expectation, it's just my circumstances around me are just going to make that expectation really difficult. And so if you're man, I'm going to have someone over every night of the week, and you have roommates, and your roommate's an introvert, and your roommate doesn't like you having people over, that's a bad expectation to set for yourself, and you should probably talk with your roommate and consider, is my season of life of living with someone else going to allow me to practice hospitality in the way I picture myself practicing hospitality? There's so many ways to work this in, but wherever you're at your season of life, that's really important to how you're going to practice these things, and show yourself grace for your season of life, and knowing that not every season is going to be for forever. And so what does it look like for me to practice here, today, March 7th, or whatever day you're watching this online, and what season of life I am, what's going on in my life, what commitments do I have, how am I doing personally, what's going on behind me that people don't see, all that stuff needs to be considered in forming this rule. And then the last 2, keep it ongoing, an ongoing rule of life, meaning it's probably going to change a lot as time goes on. Like I said before, seasons of life change. So what works in one season isn't going to work in another season. So my reading and prayer and scripture had to change. I had to move it up. Either I had to move it up earlier, or I actually to condense it, so I just don't have the time that I once had in the mornings. And so I've had to change that and release that. And so keep it ongoing, keep it flexible. Probably I would say every few months, review your practices, your habits, and your schedule. Is this working? And if it is, awesome, keep going. If not, figure out where the changes are necessary. And then finally, practice within a community. Practice within a community. I'm actually, I think this is my biggest failure and trying to implement a rule of life and all these disciplines and all of that over the last couple of years is it was very much a solo venture. It was very much like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to wear all this. Like, I'm going to run up the hill. I got this. This is like, I'm going to take on the world. And I just continually hit the same walls and same roadblocks and just really struggled. What's funny is I was talking to a lot of other people in the same demographic, and that was their same experience. And so I was like, hey, why don't we just all get together and practice together? And so there's a group of us, actually all like former or current Waymaker people, where we adopted a common rule of life. We took it and we were like, hey, let's go after these practices. We'll adopt it to how it fits our season of life, to what we're going through, what we're at, and let's practice it together. We're going to hold each other accountable. We're going to confess when we break it. We're going to like confront each other when we need to be confronted, and it's going to be a group venture, and we're not going to just try to do it on our own. And I actually think this has been like my most, probably I say successful, just healthy, consistent last couple of months since I started doing that. And it's because I just know there are other people going after it as well. I have accountability. I have people to say that like, hey, I'm breaking this area of my life, or I'm really struggling with implementing this, and we can encourage each other and actually walk with it together. And so doing anything by yourself is really difficult. And so find, whether it's your roommate or a spouse or a family member or someone else, or maybe a group of people at work or wherever it is, a community group, whatever it is, and actually just form a community of people who are going to go after the same things, and it just is a lot easier. So those are all those things to consider when walking into this. And now really what it looks like is, what do you want to do, and what do you feel like you should do? Meaning, I don't think God is like, hey, every practice you should do should be a big struggle and should be against your personality and should be like really hard for you. But some of us, depending on how we're wired, naturally move ourselves to some of these disciplines. What are those disciplines? Put them in your life. Like, what do you want to do? How do you relate to God? How does your personality interact with these things? But then also, what do you feel called and led to do? What is the Spirit pressing in and really pushing you out of your comfort zone? And so it's finding those 5, 7 in some cases, maybe even less than that, and actually just writing them down specifically and placing them in your schedule. Again, it's not, some of you are like, thanks, Tanner, like, I didn't need to sit for you to talk for 45 minutes to hear that explained. But it really is that simple. It really is that simple. And then creating that schedule and then just keeping to it and being consistent. So how I would love for us to end our time is actually doing that, is with a group of people, we're going to talk through, we're going to flip over that page. We have that chart, and we're just going to write out, all right, what are the ones I'm already practicing? What are the ones I want to practice? And again, be realistic. And what would it look like for me to practice that thing? What would it look like for me to actually go after fasting once a month? Or what would it look like for me to have daily time of prayer in Scripture? And write it out and be specific, and then we'll just kind of talk through and encourage each other and share. And I would say too, like, don't feel like you need to write out your entire life schedule in this however long we have. Take some time to reflect throughout this week, but I encourage you, if you don't complete everything today, what I really encourage you to do is, after it's completed or after you feel like you've really reviewed and set through and you feel like, all right, I've actually taken time to intentionally think about this, share it with somebody else. Like, show someone else your chart, or talk about it with somebody else, or just have someone else know that you're going after this. Again, not just a solo venture. So that's what we're going to do for the rest of our time. I hope this was helpful and practical, and we're just going to work through it.